Well, it looks like in this video I need to do a 2-for-1 as we waste $113 billion rebuilding Afghanistan, which has actually shown little to nothing, according to an inspector general of ours. And then on top of it, a Democrat congressman kind of wrote this little whistleblower book, if you will, about what Congress is really like. And I remember seeing this one congressman who got ousted at the time for wrestling with boys, young men, inappropriately. And Glenn Beck had him on his show to clear his name. This was a few years ago. Not that I watched Glenn Beck at all, but it was on there, and it was on the internet, so I watched it. And Glenn Beck said, look, I'm trying to give you the floor. Clear your name. Go ahead. And the guy would not say really anything about how these charges against him were false. But went on to talk about how corrupt Congress is in the fact that he said something like in an 8-hour day, 6 hours is spent campaigning, donations, campaign contributions. What are we going to do to get some more money in here? I got to finance my campaign because I need to keep this job because this job is fantastic. Lifelong benefits, unbelievable retirement. Most of the time we all leave millionaires. So the longer I can stay in office, forget the measly $200,000 a year salary, whatever it is, 190, 200,000. Forget that little turd. I want millions, so I need to stay in as long as I can because every 2 or 3 years I can stay longer. That's just more campaign contributions, which amount to millions that I get to collect once I resign. If I don't spend it. And believe me, I'll only spend enough to put my face back out there when it's time to campaign again and promise you guys everything you want to hear, even though I don't mean any of it, as you're going to find out. But first, I want to start with the $113 billion waste. Nothing to show for it, but a big IOU to American taxpayers and future generations. We wasted in Afghanistan. It says, this is from the New York Post. We wasted $113 billion in Afghanistan. No wonder America First from Donald Trump resonates. And it says, there's a little picture of this young kid holding a goat upon his head in Afghanistan. The U.S. lost $6 million of your money trying to spur the goat cashmere industry. Now I might argue that's money well spent. I mean, 50 million people on food stamps, more people joining every day. The amount that you get in your food stamp check comes down because there's only a certain amount that goes to everybody, so you have to spread out the wealth. Or while that's happening, $6 million to the Kashmir industry in Afghanistan. Oh, tough one. While Donald Trump took a lot of heat. Did I just say Donald Trump? Because it sounded like I said that. My mind wasn't saying it, but my mouth kind of felt like it said that. So let me start over if you don't mind. Excuse me. While Donald Trump took a lot of heat for his recent America First speech, which foreign policy experts rejected as isolationist, a scathing new Pentagon report on Afghan reconstruction actually backs his stance against nation building. Imagine that. And by the way, just read this today, some forces in the Middle East need our help in Libya. We need to go into Libya. We need some help now. Gotta go into Libya. In virtually every category, from infrastructure to education to security, our virtual adoption of that nation has been a costly fiasco. In a report to Congress, the Defense Department reveals that Washington so far has spent an eye-popping $113.2 billion to rebuild Afghanistan, an amount that, adjusted for inflation, tops by $10 billion the total we committed to rebuilding post-World War II Europe under the Marshall Plan. Yet, in this case, taxpayers have almost nothing to show for it. Much after the Afghan reconstruction funds have been lost to waste, fraud, abuse, and rampant corruption. And remember, I did a video sometime last year, I think, $43 million Afghan or Pakistan gas station. U.S. funded alternative fuel gas station. Should have cost, according to the accountability, whatever a particular office looked at this, half $500,000 should have cost. $500,000 turned into $43 or $44 million. But you piece of crap, sorry taxpayer, we're going to raise your insurance rates, health insurance, and we're going to let the companies raise them and raise them and raise them because we need to take other people's money to pay for the people who can't have it. And you can only take from someone while they have it and pay someone else who doesn't have it. It only lasts so long. So while that's going on, they want you to not be able to afford it, because then what happens? You have to pay the tax or fine through the IRS through your income tax returns at the end of the year, or the beginning of the next year, I should say, if you don't have health insurance. Oh, you got a family of 5, and all 5 of you didn't have insurance? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times whatever the rate is, because it keeps going up every year. Taxes for Uncle Sam. To keep giving away $43 million gas stations to Middle Eastern buddies that should have cost us $500,000. Who am I to complain? That's un-American of me, isn't it, to complain? Where do we go? And unlike Western Europe, where we today enjoy profitable export markets, benighted Afghanistan, formerly renamed the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, by the way, offers virtually zero return on our massive investment. After 15 years, the reconstruction effort in Afghanistan is in a perilous state. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, John Sopko, concludes in his 236-page report. The reconstruction mishaps in Iraq are legion and legendary, but less is known about the rebuilding of Afghanistan, where the screw-ups are just as bad, if not worse. Take security projects and programs, which account for roughly 60% of the $113 billion in Afghan reconstruction funding. Why? The key word was in the sentence. Security projects and programs. Security, United States privately owned militias go over there, military, Blackwater, those guys charging us, $50 for a 6-pack, maybe a 12-pack of Coca-Cola. And I remember I was watching a video where they said, here, I want to show you these 2 soda cans. Here's an American one, Coca-Cola. Here's one for the Middle East. Same thing, looks the same, except the writing on the can is for, I guess for Islam, you could say. And the one on the right, American English. Same product, same everything. You could even buy it there locally for way, way cheaper. Nope. We want to pull in Halliburton, charge us $40 and $50 per 12-pack or 6-pack, whatever the hell it is. That's the way they do it. So we are being absolutely plundered. The taxpayers are being absolutely plundered. It actually gets better. It gets better. Despite spending some $5 billion per year to stand up a national army and police force, quote, neither the United States nor its Afghan allies know how many Afghan soldiers and police actually exist, his report showed. A large share of this is AWOL. In fact, Afghan military and police roles contain potentially tens of thousands of ghost personnel whose cost we still pay and whose absence distorts the security picture. Without U.S. combat troops, the capital of Kabul is now relying almost exclusively on unreliable forces to defend itself from sacking. A large chunk of the country remains unprotected and unstable. Almost a third of provincial districts are effectively under Taliban control, and the insurgency is intensifying. The Taliban? I thought them boys retired. I thought ISIS took over. In the space of just a few days in late March, for example, the Taliban assassinated an Afghan army general in Kandahar and a judge in Ghazni while bombarding the new Afghan parliament building in Kabul with rockets. The security situation is so bad that American personnel are generally confined to the U.S. Embassy fortress and have to take a helicopter to get to the airport because the roads are so unsafe. Here's a few pointers, bullet points, I should say. More than $200 million to buy fuel for Army vehicles has gone missing. Another $500 million was wasted buying a fleet of second-hand Air Force cargo planes that were deemed too dangerous to even fly. More than $1 million, oh, it's a good, thankfully just $1 million, was spent building and rebuilding Army buildings that melted in the rain and crumbled because of substandard bricks and other materials. That's money well spent there. And about $32 million to install steel bars in culverts to prevent the Taliban from placing bombs under roads was also largely wasted. We gotta, the war on drugs. Can't leave the Afghans out with the war on drugs. Efforts at drug interdiction have also failed. Despite spending $8.4 billion on counter-narcotics programs, the poppy fields of Helmand province have largely been reclaimed by the Taliban, which sells opium to finance terrorism. As a matter of fact, trade is flourishing with that. Here's a stomach-turning stat. The 3,300 tons of opium the United Nations figured Afghanistan produced last year is the same number the UN calculated for the country's opium production in the year 2000. So literally, nothing has changed. So to warm you up, let's get into the congressman who anonymously writes this bombshell book, supposedly. Once again, New York Post is covering this. An anonymous congressman has dropped a bombshell election year book that confirms why Americans hate their national government and have rallied to anti-establishment presidential candidates like Donald Trump. The veteran politician lays bare a rotten and corrupt Congress enslaved by lobbyists and interested only in re-election in an anonymous 65-page manifesto called The Confessions of Congressman X. Like most of my colleagues, he says, I promise my constituents a lot of stuff I can never deliver, he admits. But what the hell? It makes them happy hearing it. My main job is to keep my job. End quote. The House member, a Democrat who is either still in Congress or served sometime over the past 2 decades, says more time is spent fundraising than reading bills and calls Washington a sinkhole of leeches. Now that's interesting because that's the exact same story I told you that the former congressman who was ousted said on Glenn Beck's show. Makes me wonder, was this the same guy by chance? More time is spent fundraising than reading bills and calls Washington a sinkhole of leeches. I was going to say more like a cesspool full of turds, but we can just stick with that one. The title of one chapter sums up his view of congressional leaders. Quote, Harry Reid's a pompous ass, he says of the Senate Democratic leader. The book, published by the Small Mill City Press, is based on years of transcribed private discussions, which the congressman last November gave editor Robert Atkinson. Atkinson declined to say whether Congressman X is a current or former House member. X says the cloak of anonymity gave him the freedom to expose secrets, including how the public's money is wasted. And that's why I wanted to kind of preface this with the story I just gave you. Talk about waste. He said he and his colleagues often lie to try to be all things to all people instead of tackling the nation's problems. Quote, I contradict myself all the time, but few people notice, he says. 1 minute, I rail against excessive spending and ballooning debt. The next minute, I'm demanding more spending on education, healthcare, unemployment benefits, conservation products, yada, 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 end quote. Voters are described as gullible, know-nothing jerks, while the only people who count are the big donors who pour billions of dollars into lobbying. Voters are incredibly ignorant, he says. It's far easier than you think to manipulate a nation of naive, self-absorbed sheep who crave instant gratification, vents Congressman X. He nailed that one. He says money corrupts and House members are puppets to lobbyists who bankroll their campaigns. Quote, business organizations and unions fork over more than $3 billion a year to those who lobby the federal government. Does that tell you something? We're operating a effing casino, he says. He describes himself as a closet moderate who supports charter schools and tax vouchers to allow poor kids to go to private schools. But students take a back seat to partisan politics. Quote, our education's in the toilet, and all we do is snipe at each other, he says. Congress is too polarized and partisan to get anything done, by the congressman's account. Quote, there seems to be a complete disintegration of confidence in government. A fear that government is its own special interest, he says. That's a Big 10 for. America is on an irreversible decline, and no one in Washington seems to care. God help us, he says. The controversial book set off a guessing game in the political world about the author's identity. New York sources speculated its representative, Steve Israel, a moderate who announced he's retiring and who has complained about the constant need to fundraise to finance re-election campaigns. But Israel, a novelist, denied that he took pen to paper this time. He says absolutely not true, never heard of it before, and frankly, now that I'm leaving Congress, if I were to write a book like that, I would put my name on it, he said. Doesn't really matter who said it. Someone from the inside who knows, again, all you and I get is more of the same old. More taxes coming, more pensions being destroyed, and more spending. Take care.